All right. Hey, everybody. Gary is on his 60th birthday trip right now. And to avoid getting the stink eye from Jennifer, which I wouldn't blame him from happening, he is letting Jack and I wing it, which is probably good or bad. I will say it's very discombobulating because I'm so used to seeing a third head on these Zoom calls and be able to, patiently wait to get asked a question. I'm like, oh crap, I actually have to start off talking. So anyway, today's theme for the week is just going to be a continuation of, thinking through succession planning. What if you got hit by a bus? Jack and I'll, continue to share a couple war stories and best practices, but then really even leave it open to you guys to decide, what are the questions that you may have that you want us to address for you. So it's your time and your meeting to hear whatever you need to know or feel like you need to know. So I'll go ahead and get us started off with just a couple things from this week that are going to be focused primarily on the North Carolina grant that we discussed last week. So just a refresher, if you haven't heard of it, or just a refresher from last week, just to provide a little bit additional clarity. As part of the CARES Act for COVID stimulus relief, there was some direct stuff that went straight to businesses that we already know about. That was PPP and ERC. In addition to that, the individual states all got some big grants to do what they wanted to with respect to pandemic relief. Part of that was to make funds also available for businesses. So North Carolina, in its first wave of trying to utilize its CARES grant money, focused primarily on hospitality and restaurants, and just it was not able to fully deploy the money. So there's still a big slug of change left. I want to say it was like $400 million off the top of my head. And you can now get a grant from the state of North Carolina up to $500,000 if you can demonstrate that your revenues were down by greater than 20%, from basically March 19 through February 2020 relative to March 2021 through February 2022, if I got my dates right. So it spans a calendar year. But if you can prove that your revenues are down, then you are off the races and can apply for the grant. And basically what North Carolina is doing is giving you not one-to-one, but they're giving you money relative to how much money you lost during that time period. So it is a pretty good deal. It's free money. Generally speaking, if you qualified for PPP round 2 or you qualified for the employee retention tax credit, chances are you're probably going to qualify for this too. So that would be on my radar if I was one of those people. So that's the big stuff that I had for this week. How about you, Mr. Santaniello?
So not a whole lot necessarily to report. I think that so there is, I think the Senate or the Congress is a little bit distracted this week, justifiably so, with Ukraine, and there's a lot of focus on sending money that way. I will tell you that there is some sentiment that, okay, wait a minute, we have our own issues here and in the US with respect to businesses, and why are we sending money over there? And the counter argument is, well, it's not a matter of business and livelihood, it's a matter of survival. And so, whatever side you end up on, there just the impact is that the US Congress is focusing some time on that. There is the EIDL fund has officially been exhausted, but there has been talk and putting more money into there potentially. The SBA is also looking to focus on minority-owned businesses and veteran-owned businesses. We haven't really discussed that. Maybe that's a topic for another time, but there are programs out there, and I'm sure many of you are aware of them, and maybe even are minority owned businesses, certified owned businesses that get certain advantages with respect to contracting in the construction industry, in hospitality industry, concessions, those kind of things. So some things to look into as well, potentially, because it sounds like that they are maybe finding creative ways to put money into the system that maybe had been sitting there and maybe untapped, rather than it getting taken away from them. Because you can imagine that in all aspects of government, whether it's federal, state, local, it's always a push and pull. Several years ago, when I was in leadership Charlotte, we went through they called it a poverty simulation. I think they call it something differently, more politically correct now, many years later. But it was basically putting together the budget for Mecklenburg County and trying to decide, and you have all of these requests coming at you, and where do you put the money? And it's easy to allocate money. It's much harder to find where the money's coming from. And it was interesting to see the impact on other programs when you start shifting money around. So I have total respect for the people that have to do those and make those kind of decisions, city, local, county, state, federal government. It's a difficult decision, but my point is that happens. And so it seems like that they are trying to put more money out there in different programs. So it goes back to a comment that we've made previously, which is every once in a while, just kick the tires in Google. And if you're looking for money, see what's out there, because there are continuing, and I mentioned that I do work for the Central Carolina Council of Governments, which is a facilitator. So they take people that have money and want to implement it, usually on different counties, different programs, and deploy money from federal grants, from state grants, et cetera. So it's not static. It's very much organic and moving, and new stuff pops up. So please do check if you're looking for some financial help.
All right. So in terms of continuing on the theme of succession planning and, really talking about the, kind of the crisis management fundamentals of it, a little bit of this will bleed into, people's personal lives. But, again, nobody wants to think about something bad happening to them at all. Like we all believe that we're invincible. I don't know if we have any Star Trek fans on the that are listening in right now. Jack, okay, so have you watched Strange New Worlds yet?
I haven't. I'm waiting until the season continues and there's more episodes, so that way I can buy my Paramount Plus subscription back.
I mean, you didn't have your Paramount Plus subscription?
I had it
for Picard. Okay,
for Picard, and then I let it go.
Okay,
well, I'm cheap, man.
Yeah, I'm very disappointed in you.
No.
Anyway, one of the if you saw Star Trek Discovery, then that Captain Pike foresaw his own time in the chair, and ultimately his death that appears in the Menagerie parts 1 and 2 from the original series, which was the original Star Trek pilot before they replaced Captain Pike with Captain Kirk. Anyway, enough geekdom there. Point being that a lot of the theme from the show was, people believing that nothing bad would happen to them until something bad happens to them. Up until the moment that something bad happens to them. So, I think, our point of this, current topic series is just to get people thinking through, not worrying about whether or not bad things are going to happen to them. It's actually quite the opposite. It's doing, the responsible thing and saying, all right, something bad, well, eventually something's going to happen to me, whether it's naturally or not, I don't know. But, on the unlikely event that something does happen to me, what would I want to happen? And just kind of, I think that the best practice that we've seen in this area is just making kind of a narrative script. If something bad were to happen to me, this is what I would like to happen. This is what I would like to have happen with the business. This is what I would like to have happen to my personal effects. Here's what you need to know that nobody knows but me right now. um that sort of thing. I mean, if you think about it, you could accomplish a lot with this exercise in terms of just making sure that whoever would necessarily have to pick up the crap after you're done uh actually has some kind of roadmap. I mean, if you just took some time and budgeted 2 hours of your time to say, all right, this is what I would like to have happen, that is an extremely good starting point of just coming up with a narrative of things that you would like to see addressed, which also I think would provide a lot of insight into things that, assuming nothing bad happens, probably going to poke some holes in where you need to go as a business in terms of holes that you need to address. So I guess, yeah, that's my comment on what I've seen as a best practice in terms of people addressing, hey, what if the unexpected happens? It's just, to find a quiet 2 hours and just write down, well, what would you like to have happen? As a starting point. What do you think, Jack, in terms of best practices that you've seen?
I think that's absolutely true. So you're talking about, kind of what is the plan and the roadmap. And last week we talked about kind of the three components: the beginning, the middle, and the end, just to kind of put it kind of succinctly. One thing that we didn't talk about necessarily is, and now we're kind of jumping into a little more details into how you get from the beginning to the end. And I mean, the end of having a good, wholesome, robust plan, which is, as we said, very overwhelming to just even think about, like all the things you have to do. So bit by bit, literally getting it together. And so what we didn't talk about was how necessarily you would do that, the mechanics of it, the technology of it. So a lot of clients who will use things like Dropbox or some sort of organizational tool. And I will tell you that, well, I'd be happy to share if anybody wants to send me an email, the generic version of what a due diligence list looks like in a typical transaction. It's very thick. It's going to have things like environmental and commercial real estate and all those things. But it is what we use to evaluate a business in due diligence side on the buyer side, and then we require our sellers to start populating the stuff in expectation of getting the list, their version of it, meaning the seller, the buyer's version, if we're representing the seller. And so, but it is also similarly useful in thinking about what you should put in your Dropbox of stuff, and maybe even sets up the structure. So organizational documents, your articles of organization or incorporation, your bylaws, your shareholders agreement, your operating agreement. You may want to put prior tax returns in there, maybe year-end financials, audits. You may want to put in your deed for the property, put in your appraisal documents, put in your other documents that are related to maybe the real estate, put employment agreements in there. And you do that for your own planning. You do it maybe in anticipation of a funding event, whether it's bringing in private equity, whether it is conventional loan. But these are the things that a buyer is going to look at. These are the things that your attorney and your CPA are going to look at in helping you formulate that succession plan. These are the things that the bankers are going to look at. And so why not go ahead and put that stuff together? I will tell you that from a banker's perspective, when a potential borrower comes at them and they say, okay, here's the stuff that we need. And you say, all right, here is a link to our Dropbox that has all the information you are looking for. That relationship starts off really on a great foot, and you're going to have a more cooperative lender in most cases. Obviously, they still have their requirements. They're going to have to jump through certain hoops and do all those things, but you're starting out with a really good, I think, a higher trusted relationship, trust but verify, but trusted relationship, versus you having to do a seek and find in your computer directory, or go look in that banker's box that you put your CPA's envelope that had your federal tax return from 4 years ago, kind of thing. So again, just some tips to stay organized, and that way when it hits, it isn't as overwhelming, and you're chipping away at the things that are going to get you to that finish line of being fully prepared for all those options. Again, sell, investment, loan. So
Yeah, that's right. And again, I use the same client example that I used last week of the guy that had been, looking to try to get something done since 2016, 2017, finally assigning documents that aren't even, they're just the beginning of the documents, in May of 2022. But, if you go back to, what we're talking about in terms of this roadmap, is that, it kind of started, let's say Jack and I are, I'm the sole owner, Jack's my key employee. Sorry, Jack, I'm in charge. It kind of starts with, me taking from my head and putting on paper, I would like Jack to take over the company and do what he wants with it, and I want my family to get paid. Okay, well, now it's out of my head and it's on a sheet of paper. What does that mean? Well, it kind of triggers me to a next round of action called, probably ought to talk to Jack about that. I probably ought to buy some life insurance so Jack can afford to pay for it. I probably ought to get an employment agreement on Jack to make sure he's not going anywhere, anytime soon. Maybe we start thinking about, maybe there's some phantom ownership, so that Jack starts, it just starts my process. I've also kind of at that point said, Jack, you're my successor, so I start thinking about, to Jack's point about, it's ultimately helpful if you sell it. I start the product, shit, I got to get Jack ready, for something. If on the other hand, maybe my path is, I'd like to see the company sold, and I want to make sure that Jack's still around to help through that transition of a sell. And then I want to make sure that my CPA and attorney are looped in, and, I've got an investment banker already lined up. That comes out of my head on a piece of paper. Okay, again, is Jack locked up and ready to help with that? Does he understand that's what the plan is? Do I need to maybe incentivize him with some skin in the game? I probably ought to get that plan buttoned up. When I just referenced my CPA and attorney, do they kind of know that I'm going to be counting on them, to help out with an orderly transition? Do I even know an investment banker at this point that I could be talking to that would help things out? I mean, these are all, these are all things that kind of trigger you into that next step of what you need to do as the next action after you take it from your head, put it on paper, to develop that roadmap of stuff that you need, that you ultimately need to start getting done, that are going to have a benefit to your business, whether you go to sell it, you just want to keep on growing it. I mean, you can't say out loud 10 times, I don't want to invest in Jack's training and development or otherwise take any responsibilities off my plate, because I think I'll make more money if I don't do that. You just can't say that out loud.
right. And you had mentioned, in talking about employees, so let's talk about let's take a quick kind of diversion tangent, that one of the I think the most valuable assets of a business is its employees, but more specifically the employment agreements that those employees are under. So as buyer's counsel, I definitely am interested in what these employees are bound by, especially if there's some technology or something, the trade secrets, customer list, whatever it may be. So I want to know that that is happening. And a lot of times when we're helping clients, businesses that are in preparation mode, or getting ready for, they just want to kind of shore things up. one of the things is, okay, why are your key employees not under an employment agreement? Or it's, well, they have an NDA, but it's not really an employment agreement. There is a common misconception that by having an employment agreement, you somehow have taken the at-will relationship into a term relationship that can only be terminated for cause. And that's absolutely not accurate. You can have an employment agreement for an at-will relationship, and we do it all the time. What you're doing is that you are tidying up the restrictive covenants, so the non-compete. And it may be that it's not really a non-compete, but it's a non-solicitation of employees, of customers, and non-disclosure of trade secrets and other things. So maybe not that you can't go work for another company. It really just depends on the employee. So when I say non-compete, I really kind of mean it more in the general restrictive covenant kind of sense. But then it is, okay, what are the rules of the game so that you can terminate them for cause or at will? And so it gives you also ammunition to, if they do breach that agreement and then they try to go get unemployment and say, well, I was just let go for no reason. Well, no, you were let go because you violated paragraph 3C Romanet 1 of this agreement. So it helps you with defending an unemployment claim. And so, but it really becomes somewhat troublesome when you have some key employees that are free reign essentially and have not been locked down. So what do you do in those circumstances? You cannot throw an employment agreement into, at least in North Carolina, into someone's face and say, here, sign this or else you lose your job. I mean, you can, but if they sign it and it has that restricted covenant, then it's likely unenforceable. So there's certain things that you have to do, which is typically referred to as additional consideration, whether it's a bonus. There are some states that continued employment is sufficient consideration, Florida being one of them. And so, and take that very generally. It doesn't mean that you can, go down in Florida and throw an employment agreement to someone and sign it, has restricted covenant. It's always going to be enforceable, but it doesn't have similar requirements as you do in North Carolina, that there has to be additional consideration. The keeping your job is not sufficient additional consideration. So you think about those things and think about how are you protecting your assets as part of that and part of that succession plan. And to Adam's point, I totally agree that you gotta bring people into your inner circle, especially the ones that are going to be impacted or are part of your plan moving forward and implementing your succession plan, and not be like, hey, here's an opportunity for you, because there has to be some planning, maybe some insurance and those kind of things. So yes, absolutely agree.
So, again, key takeaway, just start, something, because nothing, that's kind of the, wait, maybe this will never happen to me, strategy. So with that in mind, we're going to open it up for some questions. We've taken up a lot of y'all's time. So let's go ahead and open it up to questions and, give you a couple minutes to address anything that might be on your all's mind. Gary has much more elegant ways that he asks that statement, but, Q&A is part of the deal here. So ask any questions that you might have. If otherwise, Jack and I have hit it out of the park, we'll let you have some time back. Or I can just talk slowly again.
Yeah. And it doesn't have to be related necessarily to succession planning. Anything that really comes up. I think I threw out some statistics a couple of weeks ago that franchising is on the increase. I think that people are happy with other people trying to figure things out and then implementing it. I will say what I always say to prospect franchisees, that while you do own the business, meaning you are the manager, member, shareholder of the LLC or corporation, that you really are not running your own business. You're running it with someone else's rules. And hopefully the processes and procedures have been well proven. And if everybody does what they're supposed to do, everybody makes money. The problem is that when you start implementing as a franchisee your own desires on how to do certain things, then that's where there's usually conflict. And I have talked people out of becoming franchisees because they admit to me on the front end that, yeah, we're going to get in the system, but we've been doing this for a while. So it's really just to get the brand name and then we're going to do it our way. I'm like, that's not going to last very long. I mean, and there is a small percentage that it might, because the franchisor may say, hey, that's a great idea, and we're going to do it too. And understand that when you sign a franchise agreement and you start doing things your own way, that it really becomes their property at that point, somewhat. The other is with I've seen a lot of activity and have had more than several people come to me that own businesses and are thinking about what their next step is as far as increasing the enterprise and their distribution reach and everything else. And really you have two options. You do it on your own or you do it with someone else's money and someone else's time, meaning franchising. And there's variations of that: distributor, licensing, that kind of thing. As a side note of that, some people get into, they say, well, we're going to license the system, and so that, or license the technology and the processes to allow someone else to open up a similar shop in another city or another territory. And what you've really done is you've what is called an inadvertent franchise system, that you are basically operating an illegal franchise system. And so you can't just say, well, I'm going to license this and then tell them what to do, how to do it exactly, kind of thing. In comparison to, for example, would be Coca-Cola that licenses its mark to producers that don't produce liquid. They make shirts or do other things with it, and while there are brand standards like what the logo should look like, they're not telling those manufacturers it has to go on yellow shirts, it has to be this quality of cotton, it has to do all these kind of things. So but back to where I was going with this is that the distribution model, seeing a lot more people going into and saying, I want to franchise my business in order to grow the business, the goodwill, the distribution aspects of it. So something to keep in mind, that that is an option. It's expensive on the front end. And so that's when you tell people, well, this is an investment that you're going to reap the benefits of and recuperate or recoup your investment as time goes on. But it's a big number to put into the bucket, essentially to put into my trust account in order to be able to give you a finished product, just to be very candid. But then it's kind of like an annuity. You get repaid back, and then at some point it becomes profitable for you. So.
All right. Thank you, Jack. So any questions from the audience? We'll do that awkward pregnant pause here for a minute, or otherwise hum the theme to Jeopardy.
Maybe we fried everyone's brains and they're just,
Yeah, these guys keep on talking about me dying. Why would I tune in that thing? That's horrible. I don't want to do that. Okay. Robert, comment. Thank you. I was about to go, cry in the corner for a minute. Go pet my dog. Maybe he'll smile and pretend that he likes me for a minute. So, all right. Well, cool. Well, we won't keep you guys any longer, and appreciate you guys still continuing to tune in. We'll keep up, somewhat with the session planning theme, but we'll stop talking about death here. in the next one, we'll start talking about more fun stuff. But anyway, in the meantime, do y'all have any ideas for topics or questions that you guys have? Make sure that you're emailing us, at a minimum at FAQ@trustbgw.com, or hit out me, Jack, or Gary directly, and we'll make sure we get them addressed. So
and I have a request of this group. Sure. Before people start signing off, which is, I'm very curious as to what has worked for all of you in your respective companies as far as incentives to employees. It's what is continued, and I see in our shop and in other places is uh, people working 1 day remote. I mean, 1 day in the office and 4 days remote, and getting paid a lot of money for doing that. And I think that technology has allowed us to do things that we would never been able to do several years ago. And definitely, 10 years ago, it's like, no, you have to be in the office to do certain things. But as an employer, I think that we all struggle with that. And, for me, at my age, I have responsibilities of mentoring the younger people in my firm and, making sure that I'm available. And while I could probably do my job sitting in my home office because I've have enough technology there, I do burn through a lot of personal ink on my printer. I haven't pilfered a printer from the office yet, but I am curious if you guys would email us and just let us know kind of what seems to be working for you, or maybe things that don't work that you thought would work and people are like, yeah, thanks, but no thanks, kind of thing. Because we've had people that come into interviews that that will wait till the last minute and say, oh yeah, by the way, I assume you're going to let me work 2 days, 3 days at home, right? I'm like, no, but it seemed like the answer's not necessarily a hard no. It's maybe, let's see if we can find a way to work this out. Let's see if we trust you to actually do the work at home. So again, a solicitation for maybe what has been best practices or practices that work on employee retention for you.
Yep. No, we definitely also hit that on the next webinar. So appreciate it, Jack. All right. Any last questions? Going once, going twice. Sold. Well, you guys enjoy the rest of your afternoon, and we'll see you again next week. And we'll have that magical third head, Gary, to keep us all more lively and engaged.
Yeah, someone needs to tell him we didn't screw it up too.
Yeah, we didn't screw it up, but it wasn't the same. So anyway, thanks guys, appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye.
Right, bye.